Sometimes a person enters a room and seems to belong there almost immediately, not because they already know everyone, not because they dominate the conversation or draw attention to themselves. In fact, the opposite often happens. They blend in quickly, moving through the space, as if the atmosphere already fits them perfectly. At first, nothing appears unusual. They greet people normally. They join conversations easily. Their tone of voice matches the rhythm of the group. When someone laughs, they laugh too. When the conversation becomes serious, their expression settles into the same thoughtful calm as the others around them. The interaction feels natural. If you watch closely, small details begin to appear. With one group, they speak enthusiastically about travel, sharing the same excitement about distant places and future plans. Later, with a different group, the conversation shifts toward work and ambition, and their tone adjusts again. They sound practical now, focused, attentive to the challenges of professional life. Both conversations seem sincere. People rarely notice the change. Most individuals expect others to adapt slightly during conversation. It is part of ordinary social behavior. We adjust our language, our humor, even our posture depending on who we are speaking with. It keeps interaction comfortable. The imitator simply does this more completely. Their attention moves carefully through the room, collecting signals. How quickly do people speak here? Do they prefer humor or seriousness? Do they value ambition, creativity, caution, or independence? These signals appear everywhere. In the way someone tells a story, in the subjects people return to repeatedly, in the tone that receives approval from the group. The imitator notices these patterns almost instantly, and then something subtle happens. Their words begin to follow the same direction. If the room values confidence, they sound confident. If the room values humility, their tone becomes modest. When someone expresses an opinion, the imitator often finds a way to echo the same position, sometimes with a slightly different phrasing that makes the agreement feel thoughtful rather than automatic. People respond warmly to this. Agreement creates comfort. Familiar language builds trust. Conversations feel smooth when participants appear to share the same outlook. Soon, the imitator begins to feel familiar to everyone present. Someone may say that they seem easy to talk to. Another person may comment that they understand things quickly. A third might describe them as someone who simply fits well with the group. None of these impressions are false. The imitator does fit well. But the fit changes depending on the room. Later in the evening, if the same person moves into a different conversation with people who hold very different opinions, the adjustment happens again. The tone shifts slightly. The vocabulary changes. The perspective moves just enough to remain aligned with the new group. Once again, the interaction feels natural. Most people never notice these transitions. They only experience the immediate comfort of speaking with someone who seems to share their view of the world. And so, the imitator moves quietly through the room. Always familiar, always comfortable, always reflecting something back to the people around them, like a mirror that never argues with what it sees. This is where Jung would begin to look more carefully at the imitator. On the surface, the behavior appears simple. The person adapts quickly. They understand the tone of the room. They notice what others value and adjust their words and attitudes accordingly. Conversations remain smooth, conflicts are avoided, and social acceptance arrives easily. Many people would describe this as social intelligence. But Jung would ask a deeper question. What holds these shifting versions of the self together? Jung believed that every person develops what he called a persona. The persona is the face we present to the world. It is shaped by expectations, by the need to belong, and by the practical demands of social life. It helps us move through different environments without constant friction. Everyone uses it. A person behaves differently with family than with colleagues. The tone used with close friends may not appear in a formal meeting. These small adjustments are natural. They allow social life to function smoothly. The imitator simply takes this process further. Instead of using a stable inner identity and adjusting it slightly, the imitator builds the persona almost entirely from the outside. The room becomes the reference point. The group becomes the template. In one setting, the imitator appears ambitious and forward-looking. In another, they appear reflective and philosophical. With a different group, they may adopt humor, rebellion, or quiet humility. Each version fits the situation perfectly. People around them feel understood because they see their own attitudes reflected back to them. The imitator becomes familiar very quickly. They appear to share the same interests, the same concerns, even the same sense of humor. Trust grows from this familiarity. Jung would observe that the persona is doing its job very effectively, but he would also notice something unusual. The persona is meant to be a mask that helps the individual interact with the world. Behind it, the deeper personality remains relatively stable. The mask changes slightly depending on the situation, but the person underneath remains recognizable. With the imitator, that boundary becomes harder to see. The mask changes so smoothly that observers begin to wonder whether there is a fixed expression beneath it at all. The identity appears to shift with each environment, like clothing chosen to match the weather of the room. This does not always happen consciously. Often, the imitator begins simply by learning what works. Agreement brings approval. Familiar language creates trust. Mirroring the attitudes of others keeps interactions comfortable. The psyche learns quickly from these results. Each successful adaptation encourages the same strategy again. The persona becomes more flexible, more responsive to signals from the environment. Over time, it grows into a highly sensitive instrument, constantly adjusting to match the emotional and social tone of the people nearby. Jung would see both strength and danger in this. The strength is obvious. The imitator moves through many different groups with little resistance. They rarely feel like an outsider. Their presence adapts smoothly to changing social conditions. But the danger appears more quietly. When the persona becomes too flexible, the deeper self may lose the opportunity to develop its own direction. The individual becomes skilled at reflecting others, yet uncertain about what belongs uniquely to them. The room always offers a shape to follow. The imitator learns to fit that shape perfectly, and over time the reflection becomes so convincing that even the imitator may begin to wonder which part of it is truly their own. This is where Nietzsche would begin asking a more uncomfortable question. If a person can change their identity so easily, who is actually deciding the direction of their life? Most people assume that identity comes from somewhere inside. Preferences, beliefs, ambitions, values. These elements form a center that remains relatively stable even when circumstances change. A person may adjust their behavior depending on the environment, but the deeper direction of their life usually stays recognizable. The imitator moves differently. Instead of beginning from an internal center, they often begin from the outside. The environment speaks first. The group expresses its attitudes, its priorities, its values. Only after these signals appear does the imitator align themselves with the same direction. Agreement becomes the safest position. This creates a curious effect. In every room, the imitator appears reasonable, cooperative, even insightful. They rarely provoke strong disagreement. Their opinions tend to fit the tone of the group so well that people experience them as someone who simply understands things correctly. Nietzsche would recognize the comfort of this arrangement. Human communities often reward those who reflect their values back to them. Agreement stabilizes the group. Familiar language creates reassurance. When someone echoes the beliefs already circulating in the room, they are rarely treated as a threat. The imitator learns to live inside this current. But Nietzsche would notice what slowly disappears in the process. When the direction of a life is guided mainly by external approval, something quieter inside the individual may lose its voice. The question of what one truly believes becomes difficult to answer because belief changes with the room. One group values ambition, another values humility. A third praises rebellion, while a fourth prefers stability and caution. The imitator can fit each of these environments easily. Yet Nietzsche would ask whether this flexibility hides a deeper absence. He believed that individuals must eventually confront the problem of creating their own values, not copying them, not inheriting them without examination, but choosing them consciously and shaping a life around them. This task requires friction. A person who develops their own direction will inevitably disagree with certain groups. Their values will not match every room they enter. Some people will approve, while others will resist. The imitator rarely experiences this conflict. Because their identity adjusts so smoothly, the environment rarely pushes back against them. Approval continues to arrive from many directions at once. Life becomes socially comfortable. But Nietzsche would observe that comfort can quietly replace direction. The imitator moves easily through different groups, yet each movement follows the same pattern. The room provides the shape, and the imitator fills it. This creates a strange kind of success. They are welcomed almost everywhere. Conversations remain pleasant, doors open without much resistance, and yet the path of their life begins to resemble a series of reflections rather than a line drawn from within. Nietzsche believed that a person eventually faces a moment where this question cannot be avoided. If identity is always borrowed, who is actually living the life? The imitator may still move through every room with ease, but somewhere beneath the smooth surface, the problem of authorship begins to wait. This is where Machiavelli would begin to look at imitation not as confusion, but as a tool. Most people assume that identity must be stable to be trustworthy. They expect a person to behave the same way in every situation, to hold the same opinions in every room, to reveal a clear and consistent personality over time. Consistency feels safe. But Machiavelli would be less concerned with safety and more interested in effectiveness. He would watch how people actually move through social environments and notice something simple. Trust appears faster between people who seem similar. When two individuals share the same language, the same concerns, the same attitudes toward the world, resistance begins to soften. Conversation becomes easier. Suspicion fades. Each person begins to assume that the other understands them. This moment of recognition is powerful. The imitator knows how to create it. By reflecting the tone and values of a group, they become familiar very quickly. The people in the room feel as though they have found someone who already belongs there. The imitator appears to share the same priorities, the same frustrations, the same sense of what matters. Agreement creates comfort. Comfort creates trust. And once trust appears, influence becomes easier. Machiavelli would recognize that this process rarely feels like manipulation to the people involved. It feels natural. People enjoy speaking with someone who seems to understand them without effort. They welcome the presence of someone who shares their view of the world. The imitator enters the room as a stranger. Within minutes, they appear to be part of the group. From this position, the environment becomes easier to navigate. People speak more openly. They share information about their plans, their loyalties, their disagreements with others. They explain what they value and what they distrust. All of this knowledge appears freely. The imitator simply listens. Machiavelli believed that influence often depends less on force and more on position. A person who is trusted can guide conversations quietly. Suggestions sound reasonable when they come from someone familiar. Advice feels welcome when it comes from someone who appears aligned with the group. Imitation helps create this alignment. The imitator does not need to challenge the structure of the room. Instead, they move within it, adjusting themselves until the environment accepts them naturally. Each reflection of the group's values strengthens the impression of belonging. Over time, the imitator may pass through many different circles. Each group experiences them differently. In one place, they appear ambitious. In another, they seem thoughtful. Somewhere else, they appear rebellious or cautious or philosophical. Every version feels authentic to the people encountering it. Machiavelli would see how effective this can become. A person who can enter many different environments without resistance gains access to information, alliances, and opportunities that remain closed to others. They become a familiar presence across worlds that rarely speak to each other. The imitator moves between them with ease. To those watching closely, the question may remain: where does the reflection end and the person begin? But Machiavelli would observe something else entirely. A mirror may not create the image it shows, yet the mirror still controls what the room sees. Until the next observation.